And we are live.
Good morning. Um, my name is Timothy Polasic. I'm a field representative on the Title II and Tribal Youth Grant Program, the lead field rep. So before we get started, I just want to alert everyone on the call that at this moment, due to a technical issue, we are withdrawing the Title II RFP. And so today we will not be covering the Title II bidders conference. We will actually hold another one, and we'll post on our website as soon as we re-release the RFP. So for those of you on the line and those of you who've actually made it out here today that didn't get the message yesterday, my apologies. Please continue to check the back at the website and for further updates and a re-release. So thank you, and I am sorry if you are on the line and anticipating more information, but we will not be taking questions on the Title II RFP. Thank you.
Good morning. We'll get started shortly.
Are people logging off?
Looks like we had one person.
Back again, good morning. This is Timothy Polasic, Field Representative with the Board of State and Community Corrections, and also the lead on the Tribal Youth and Title II grant programs. I just want to reiterate real quick again that today's bidders conference, we will only be covering the Tribal Youth Grant. The Title II grant has been withdrawn. We are seeking some guidance on a technical issue that was brought to our attention. Please check our website for continued updates and when it'll be released. And we will actually reschedule a bidders conference for Title II once we have a new RFP released. So thank you, and I apologize for the inconvenience. Just want to reiterate, we will not be taking questions on the Title II RFP today. So for the Tribal Youth Grant, we will continue on and work our way through the Tribal Youth Grant. If you have gone to our website, we do have the RFP posted. If you have copies in front of you, or you could go to the website and take a look at it. We will cover a number of sections today. So first, I will provide introductions in the room, and then I'll give a quick summary of the grant for the Tribal Youth. We'll give a discussion on the Executive Steering Committee and their role and what that means. Then we will give an overview of the request for proposal, discuss the proposal rating process, and then the proposal's instructions, as well as then key dates. At any time, you can chime in with questions on the website. It is, we will answer them as we go, so you do not have to wait to the end. You can put your question in, and we'll pause throughout this session to answer the questions. So again, I'm Timothy Polasic, and in the room we also have Ashley Vanderpool. Ashley, if you want to introduce yourself.
Good morning. I'm with the research unit. I'm assigned to the Tribal Youth Grant, and we'll be discussing later rating factors and the scales.
And we also have in the room Deanna Ridgway, who is our support staff here with the Tribal Youth Grant as well. So she will be another point of contact. Thank you. So let's continue, and we'll begin with the PowerPoint. So we just discussed the agenda that we're going to cover today, so I will continue on here. So the Tribal Youth Program, the overall administration, again, this is a component of the Title II funding that's under the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, the JJDPA. That is the overarching legislation, and it's administrated by the U.S. Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Programs. And then the funding then goes to the state administrating agencies. For the state of California, it is the Board of State and Community Corrections. And then there is also within the legislation a requirement for a state advisory group. And that state advisory group is a governor-appointed state advisory committee on juvenile justice and delinquency prevention, also known as the SACJAB. So all of those entities are in play. So within this funding, for the purpose of this RFP, the Board of State and Community Corrections, who I work for, we provide the administrative functions for gathering the RFP, et cetera. The SACJAB and the board itself are approving authorities, as well as provide oversight in the development and of the RFPs themselves. So the Tribal Youth is unique in that under the JJDPA, there is a provision where a portion of the funding is required to pass through to for Tribal Youth programs. And that dollar is very small. It's a percentage of the entire dollar of allocated to the state, and it's very small. I believe the dollar figure was just under $6,000 was allocated for programs annually. So What the SACJAB decided to do in their budgetary process was to actually increase that funding. And so we have a grant program now that is 100,000 annually for tribal youth programs. And let's talk about that for a bit. So the total funding under this RFP as allocated by the SACJAB is 100,000 annually. The awards themselves are 3-year grants, and the maximum amount is up to 100,000 annually. I want to point that out. If you have a program where you're not able to reach 100,000 in your proposal, that is perfectly fine. Just that is the cap. There is no floor. I suppose you could request $1, but probably not feasible for you. But just so you know, the 100,000 annually is the maximum that you can request. So it is anticipated, again, 3-year grants anticipated that the program period would begin on October 1st of 2019 and would actually continue on through September 30th, 2022. A couple key features that on the tribal youth portion is that there is no match, and also that there is no pass-through funding. So eligible applicants for the tribal youth grant funds are federally recognized Indian tribes with law enforcement functions. Within the RFP, under eligibility, it actually has a little bit of an explanation of what law enforcement function means. I encourage you to take a look at what that section prior to applying. So, but there is also a list as an attachment, as an appendix within the grant that actually has the list of federally recognized Indian tribes. If you are one of those and you have law enforcement functions, you are eligible to apply. The target population for this tribal youth grant are Native American juveniles that are under the age of 26. The age was determined on a number of factors, including our court systems, the age that individuals are under the court jurisdiction while on probation, the age that they can be held in facilities with CDCR's Division of Juvenile Justice, the brain science, et cetera. All of it was weighed on by our executive steering committee who developed the RFP and our SACJAB to determine that the best age are those under the age of 26, knowing that services may be needed post-release for those that were incarcerated or were within the juvenile justice system as under the age of 18. So just wanted to point that out. So for the tribal youth program, the applicant criteria, applicants may submit one proposal for funding. I just want to reiterate that real quick here. So all applicants submitted under a regional effort basis must meet the following criteria. A single tribe from a regional application must be listed as the lead tribe applicant. So if you have multiple tribes that are going to present a joint proposal, one of the tribes must be a lead applicant. And then every tribe involved in the regional proposal must submit a resolution from its tribal council indicating its support of the regional effort and identifying its roles and responsibilities relative to the grant. So for you, there is actually a tribal council sample within the attachments that or appendices that will give you an example of what that resolution would look like. So just wanted to make sure that you are aware of those criteria. But I also want to reiterate that an applicant may submit only one application. So for this grant, we have an executive steering committee that was established to put this grant together. They worked very hard. We had a number of professionals from various disciplines, including tribal representation, et cetera. There was 12 members. The co-chairs are Rachel Rios, who is actually also the chair of the state advisory group, and then also Michelle Scray Brown was co-chaired this ESC. Within the RFP, again in the appendices, there is a full roster. It's included. So what this group did is they were involved in the development of the RFP, and then also once once the proposals are returned back to us, they will read and rate proposals. And then we'll also then, after the rating process, develop award recommendations that will go to the SACJAB, the State Advisory Committee on Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And then from there, the SACJAB will review, approve, amend, et cetera. Maybe, should they approve those recommendations, it will then go to the Board of State and Community Corrections for their approval, at which time then the funding, the recipients of funds would be announced. So, but I want to point out with this executive steering committee that there is a conflict of interest policy that prohibits anyone who participated on the ISI from receiving these grant funds. This is important for you to know the list. If you have someone who is on that list that you're associated with, I shouldn't say associated with, that is a part of your tribe, we need to ensure that you take a look at the conflict of interest codes and check with tribal council on whether that would exclude you from participating in this within this grant process. So for this RFP, on the overview, we do have letters of intent that are due May 2nd. I do want to reiterate that these letters of intent are non-binding. And if you decide not to submit a letter of intent, that it will not preclude you, or if you're unable to due to timing, whatever the reason may be, it will not preclude you from participating. You still can present a proposal. What the letter of intent does for us is it allows us to gauge the number of applicants and applications and proposals that we receive, and allows us to prepare for the amount of staff needed to actually do our technical review, and then also then to continue on with the rating process. So, so it is important for us to know if you intend to apply. Just know that they would be due by May 2nd. But if for some reason you're unable to get a letter of intent to us, that we would that you are still eligible to apply by the deadline of the grant, which is all proposals are due for the Tribal Youth RFP. All proposals are due by 5 p.m. on June 7th, 2019. I want to reiterate this. We need one original signed proposal packet and one electronic copy sent to our jjgrants@bscc.gov website. We need both of those by 5 p.m. on June 7th, 2019. So before we continue on here, I want to see if there are any questions on any of the information that we've provided so far. I'm going to refer over to my technical staff to see if there's been anything posted. Okay, so we will continue on. So for the Tribal Youth RFP, the program purpose areas for the tribal youth grant programs are determined by our State Advisory Committee on Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Programs, and they came up with there was somewhere near around 28 different program purpose areas that were available, and they narrowed it down to 6 for this RFP. And the program purpose areas are aftercare and reentry, alternative to detention and placement, community-based programs, diversion, mental health services, and then mentoring, counseling, and training programs. You can choose more than one program purpose area. It is acceptable. It is not uncommon that you may have both, say, an aftercare program that includes mental health services, et cetera. We will address when we talk about work plan that it will play a role on how you develop your work plan, but I just want to reiterate that you can choose more than one of the program purpose areas for your proposal. So for this RFP, and this is consistent, the SACJAB, our state advisory group under the Title II program, has developed a state plan. We have a 3-year state plan, and it is posted on our website. And within that state plan, there are criteria or founding principles, I should say, that they would like the programs to include. So funded programs should be promising, data-driven, and innovative. They should include individualized case plans that are family-based. They should be culturally responsive. They should be locally relevant, and they should offer measurable outcomes. And within, yeah, well, then there is some definitions to culturally responsive within our Appendix D. And in fact, I want to refer to that real quick within the RFP, and then read a portion for you for the Native American RFP. So within Appendix D, there are a couple of definitions here that I want to make sure that that you are aware of. I won't get into too much detail because they are actually pretty descriptive here on what they mean. But they did add a couple features here through the ESC process, our Executive Steering Committee process, where you can have programs that are community-defined programs. So when we discuss promising, data-driven, and innovative, there are programs that that may be, in this case, Native American nature that are not necessarily evidence-based as far as being evidenced, as far as being reviewed for their fidelity. However, in the community, you in fact know that they do work with the youth that you serve. So that is the basics of the definition of a community-defined practice. And then also, I want you to see there is something in here, a definition here of cultural relevance. So these two portions would affect your, may affect your proposal. So I want to make sure you're aware that those definitions are there. And then also diversion, trauma-informed, goal versus objectives are also discussed within this definitions page. And then principles of effective intervention are also included. So want to ensure that you know those definitions are there. So within your programs, there is the opportunity to pass through funding should you choose to direct service providers. If you do pass through funding to a non-government organization, you need to make sure that the organization meets these criteria. And the criteria for a non-governmental organization is a duly organized, it's been duly organized in existence and in good standing at least for at least 6 months, is registered with the California Secretary of State. If it's applicable, that they have to register. So just be ensure, and then have a valid business license if required by the applicable local jurisdiction, have any other licenses or certifications necessary to provide the services requested, and then they also must have a physical address. So be aware if you do determine that you do need to pass funding down to a non-governmental organization that that this criteria must be met. So as discussed earlier, the project funding regarding project funding, these projects are 3 years, beginning October 1, 2019, and they are $100,000 available annually with the maximum available request of $100,000. So the total funding award would be $300,000 over 3 years if you were awarded the maximum amount of funding, or however you were to, whatever the dollar value would be within your proposal, up to $100,000. So also within this grant, I do also want to reiterate the Title II program, again, does not require a match. There is no pass-through requirement. And then also, there is language within the RFP discussing supplanting of funds. Make sure that you take a look at that, understand that what the meaning is, and make sure that supplanting does not occur within your proposal. And there is no local evaluation plan required. And the reason is on this one, on this particular RFP, is that the dollar value is relatively small on an annual basis. And if the cost for the local evaluation plan may be prohibited. With the intent of the ESC on this decision is to allow for as much funding to go toward direct services as possible. So within the Tribal Youth RFP, there are a number of um, requirements, and these are actually described within the RFP. So there will be a grant agreement. And as we discussed earlier, a governing board tribal council resolution to enter into a contract agreement with the Board of State and Community Corrections. Again, there is within the appendices, there is a sample template. There are audit requirements within this grant. There will be a grantee orientation at the beginning of the funding period, within a few months of the start of the program. And then also I want to make sure you guys understand the funding disbursement schedule on this. For the Tribal Youth RFP, the funding to tribes is unique in that there is a process of funds forwarding where you're able to get a certain portion of the funding for the project in advance. So please read that language as well. And then if you have, as you read that language, if you have any questions on that, please email the JJ Grants at bascc.gov. And then within the grant, there is also quarterly progress reports as well. There is a section that discusses travel requirements. There is also another section that discusses debarment, fraud, theft, and embezzlement. And we also have a comprehensive monitoring review process where most likely it would be me that would come out to visit your location and do a what we call a site visit. In that process, if you look in the RFP, there is actually a link to that location, or the link to our comprehensive monitoring visit audit. You can take a look at that and see what's required of you as far as what you need to have in place and what things we'll be inspecting as we go out to your location. There is a section that has a discussion on effective programs and data-driven approaches. And then I have on my slide here, we have the RED component, but that is not a component of the Tribal Youth Program. So, proposal in the rating process. So there is, once we have the proposals to us, the first portion that we look at, and there is a section within the RFP that discusses disqualification. And basically the disqualification for this RFP is that you are not eligible. Or if your application was not submitted within the time frame, which as stated was 5 p.m. by 5 p.m. on June 7th, both a signed copy and also the electronic copy to our website. So those would be the disqualifiers. There is also a technical review process where we then take a look at the documents you submitted forward. And at that point, we can look at, there are criteria that we will cover regarding page limits, amount of pages per section, et cetera. So at that point, we do a technical review where we take a look at a non-substantive review of out of compliance issues that could potentially be corrected. And then at that point, we would send those proposals back to you and say, you need to adjust these areas. That cannot be, it cannot be a substantive change. You cannot rewrite your proposal at that point in time. It would be something along the lines of, there's a 15-page limit of your narrative. You included 17 pages. You need to take 2 pages out. Something along those lines would fall under the technical review process. In all fairness, we all are playing on the same playing field here as applicants. We all, as you submit your proposals, we need to make sure that we're all rated equally. So within that return of those proposals, there would be a notification that would state when they would be due back to us as well. And then there is also then, once we receive those proposals, there is an ESC rating process where they will go through with our research department and in essence score your proposal to determine funding, or who would be the award recipients in this case. So Ashley, do you want to take over from this point?
So as you see with this proposal process, there are four rating, excuse me, there are different sections of rating factors, and each one is assigned a percent of total value. So the first one is program need. The second is program description. The third is program goals and objectives. And the fourth is program budget. So and you see in the diagram here, each one will be assigned a max range of 1 to 5 points. So that means the ESC member will assign 1 through 5 points to each one of those rating factors. And then the percent of total value is also assigned. So for example, program need will have a percent of total value of the entire proposal of 25% of the score. Description 30, etc. That of course adds up to 100. And so it's up to you as an applicant to determine how best to use the 15-page limit in addressing each of those sections. And as a guide, we give you that percent of total point value for each section uh, for you to determine what your pages are and what your content will fill towards each narrative section. If you look on starting on page 15, all of the rating factors are listed, as well as the rating criteria for each factor, and you will be asked to answer those in narrative form for the reading and rating process. As mentioned before, there's a 5-point rating scale. We go from poor, which is 1 point, and that anchor language is the response addresses the criteria in a very inadequate way. To score a 2 points for a fair score under the scale would be the response addresses the criteria in a non-specific or unsatisfactory way. 3 points is satisfactory. This response addresses the criteria in an adequate way. Good is 4 points, and the response addresses the criteria in a substantial way. And then finally, excellent is 5 points, and the response addresses the criteria in an outstanding way. So ESC members will be trained to use this scale when they are reading and rating your proposals. So you can understand that everyone will have the same anchors and the same scoring mechanisms to base off for every application. So it's not arbitrary. It's based on these this anchor language and this 5-point rating scale. And if you have any questions, you can refer to the RFP or contact us as well. But every rating factor, for example, program need, will have the rating criteria underneath it. So on page 15, there will be 6 rating criteria that you will need to answer to for program need, and however much detail you feel is necessary. And then, of course, that's narrative, and you will have the option or the in program description, there's a work plan to fill out, and that is also follows with goals and objectives. And then the program budget, which is special, if you note on starting on page 17 and going through to page 18, there are special instructions for that budget because it's a separate attachment that pulls up, and it's an Excel workbook. There's instructions with that. I'm sure Tim will talk about that later, but just note that it's a little bit special instructions in addition to the rating criteria and the rating factors that you'll be responding to. But you will also still be graded and rated on that budget.
And I can actually talk to that part real quick right now since we're on that section. So on page 18 of the RFP, there is actually 3 rating factors for you to address. One is the budget table. So that there is a link to the budget table. So that is the actual completion of the budget. Then there's the second part, which is within that table, which includes the budget narrative. So within each funding line item section, like say salaries, staff salaries, below that, you would then provide a narrative of how you of those costs, or say you have a supply line item. In the narrative, you would then give a description of what exactly it is you would need to purchase within your program. So keep in mind that 4.1 and 4.2 in the rating factors are included within the budget attachment. There is a 4.3, which is not included in the budget attachment, which you would have to answer within your program narrative. And that question is to describe the resources, describe how the resources are being applied to the benefit of young people. You would have to answer to that within your proposal narrative, not within the attached document. So I wanted to point out that specific component since we're on that budget portion. You're good? Thank you, Ashley. So let's turn to on your RFP, if you have it with you, or if you don't, I just want to point it out. There is, I believe it's, I'm not quite sure what page it is, but fourth page from the back, there's an actual section here that there is a document called a proposal checklist. This is a very important document for you to have and use as a reference on completing your proposal. This checklist is something that you actually need to include within your application and need to provide and need to have signed by your authorized representative. So, and as you can see, it includes components and instructions. It includes the cover sheet, discusses the Tribal Youth Grant Program proposal checklist needing to be signed. You would check that box when completed. There is an application form within this document that also needs to, or within the next pages, that also needs to have an original signed signature when returned back to us. There's a project abstract, which is 1 page only, 12-point font, 1-inch margins, 1.5 line spacing, and then within the proposal narrative itself, 15 pages in length. No additional attachments are allowed. If you do provide beyond that 15 pages, additional graphs, letters of support, etc., they will not be included and will be removed from your proposal. So the Title II Tribal Youth budget, those budget attachments, they are not included in the amount of pages for the program proposal narrative. Those attachments, as mentioned just a minute ago, are a separate document. So as you complete your budget and the narrative portion within that budget, those would be a separate attachment apart from the proposal narrative. And then at the end of this proposal, there is a project work plan that we'll discuss in just a second. For required documents, any of the NGO criteria for organizations receiving these funds need to be signed in blue ink, certified. It's required. There are some certificates. I mentioned the Debarment Fraud and Theft Embezzlement Appendix I. That would need to also be signed in blue ink. And then there's the Indian Tribe Assurance of Law Enforcement Functions at Appendix B would also need to be signed and returned to us with the package. And there is an optional document required within the package. At this point, the Governing Board and Tribal Council resolution would be, if you have that and are able to get that ahead of the application due date, that would be great. If you're not, it would be something that we would need to have prior to entering into a contract between BSCC and the awarded tribe or tribes in this case. So I want to pause real quick and check with our IT staff. Have we received any questions? And at this point, nothing. So we will continue on. So again, we discussed the budget table and the link. There is actually 2 places where the link exists. There's one in the budget section within the main portion of the document, and then one with the one within the application itself, or that you complete within the RFP. So that is important that you again realize that those documents are separate. So for the budget table, and I want to give you a couple of reminders regarding the budget table. Funds must be requested in whole dollars only, not pennies, cents. It would be rounded dollars. And then budget line items are limited to those contained within the budget attachment. And I will say this for all documents, please do not alter any of the documents that were sent to you. These are formatted specifically for this grant and are actually in line with our requirements by the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, U.S. Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Programs. So So they have criteria for us on how we report budgets to them. So these documents are set up in a way that will allow us to appropriately report as required within the JJDPA. So please, again, any of the documents, do not alter them. They're built in a way where you're able to actually use them as to complete your proposal, but should not be changed, altered, wording changed, etc. And then also in the budget itself, if you have no money requested for a particular line item, put $0 in that line item to ensure that it's realized that there is no money allocated for that line item. And then also then in the below section of the narrative within the budget table, please make sure that you put NA. Versus where a description of the funding or description of the line item proposed spending would be, just put not applicable. So also within the budget table, we have indirect costs, and we follow the federal rules of the indirect costs, which the indirect costs for applicants are built into the table. There are two options. If you have a federally, if your lead agency, the organization, the responding tribe has a federally approved negotiated indirect cost rate, we would use that within the budget table. If not, you are able to use, should you choose, a federal de minimis rate, which is 10% of total direct costs, and that's explained within the budget table. There is a section of which one to choose if you would want to choose to apply indirect costs to your proposal budget. Give me 1 second here. I got multiple documents. All right. So within the appendices, I will go through what is included in there for you to read. Again, I can take questions at our jjgrants.ca.gov or at bscc.ca.gov website. If you have questions along the way leading up to the due date, please feel free to ask, and I will also be posting a Q&A of the applicable questions that come through with answers, clarifying questions. So I just want to go through what is included within this RFP within the appendices. So Appendix A is a list of the federally recognized California tribes. So you must be on this list per the JJDPA. You must be on this list to be eligible to receive Title II funding, including the tribal youth portion of this funding. Within Appendix B, we have the sample Indian Tribal Law Enforcement Functions Assurance, which is also a requirement within JDPA that you have that law enforcement function within your tribe. And then Appendix C is the criteria for non-government organizations. And as we discussed earlier, Appendix D, we have the glossary of terms. Please take a look at those. Appendix E is the SACJAB roster, the State Advisory Committee on Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Programs. Again, that's our state advisory group that's required within Title II. And then we also have our ESC roster. And let me check real quick here. Yep, we have our ESC roster as Appendix F. Again, that's important for conflict of interest. Ensure that you take a look at who's on that list and so that we can deal with any potential conflict of interest issues that may arise through them being a part of your organization, if they are. And then Appendix G is a sample grant agreement. So this is the agreement that we would enter into between the tribe and BSCC. Take a look and through included in that is sample language for special conditions. That would be very important for you to take a look at before you apply and we move forward. So you understand what exactly it is you would be agreeing to should you be awarded funding. And then Appendix H is a sample governing board or tribal council resolution. Again, it's sample. You don't have to follow that exactly as written, but it is a sample on how you may get that resolution and attach it. And then Appendix I is a sample Title II grant program progress report. And in this case, it would be tribal youth. grant program progress report, it would be the same. And again, it's Title II because under the Title II legislation in the JJDPA, the progress reports are actually required by the federal government. And those are the data elements that are common. It is a sample, so they may be subject to change. And then Appendix J, we have the certification of compliance with BSCC policies regarding debarment, fraud, theft, and embezzlement. I'm not sure of the page number there, so don't hold me to that, but it's Appendix J. Appendix K is a sample BSCC comprehensive monitoring visit tool. As mentioned earlier, I will be making visits to your location, and that would be the audit tool that would be used as we ensure compliance with federal and state regulations. And then Appendix L and regulations associated with this grant, I should say. And then Appendix L is some resources for you regarding evidence-based practices and that you may want to take a look at. It could help you frame your proposal potentially. And again, we discussed within your proposal package, we discussed the proposal checklist, the applicant information form. We also discussed the proposal narrative, the budget table and budget narrative, and ensure that you understand that there is one of the questions of the three within that rated section that would be answered within your proposal narrative. And then also the work plan, and I want to quickly discuss the work plan real quick. So the very, very last pages of the RFP, and in fact, the very last page of the RFP, there is a work plan. So, and this work plan is a federal requirement of, and what you would do with this is you would have objectives and goals, which if you look in the definitions page and under, there is a, or I'm sorry, in the, there is a section, yeah, in the definitions page that discusses objectives and goals, objective versus goals. So take a look at that, and it will give you an idea of what an objective means. And then you would actually then, to meet those objectives, what are the project activities, staff partners, and your start and stop dates. It basically builds your work plan. So within this proposal, if you choose to have more than one of program purpose area, you would complete one of these documents for each of the program purpose areas you choose. And the reason that is for our side, working with the federal government, that we actually have different data requirements based off of the program purpose area that we would submit. So if you choose multiple program purpose areas, it was perfectly acceptable and common. We would need a work plan for each of the program purpose areas going forward. So I just want to point that part out. And then lastly, we have, I guess, before we get to this page, let's go back a second. Sean, any questions or responses? It looks like our IT staff says nothing through the live stream. So key dates. Keep checking back on these key dates. I want to mention that they are subject to being moved, other than the two dates that are very important for you are the letter of intent and the proposal due date. And again, by 5 p.m. on June 7th, 2019, all proposals are due. And again, we need the hard copy, and we also need the electronic copy to the JJ grants at bscc.ca.gov web email. And then just to follow through with this, there will be the technical review process. We mentioned it's in June, and then there will be if there are any non-substantive changes that would be due, we would determine them and send you notice of what would need to be changed, which areas were of issue. And then currently right now, it's expected that through mid-June and all the way through mid-August, the rating process would occur. And that the intention at this moment is that these proposals would then be the funded recommended proposals would be, or the proposals recommended for funding would be brought to the SACJAB by the Executive Steering Committee and recommended to them for funding on August 14th. Should they then approve, it would then be sent to the board for approval, which the expected date would be the September 14th board meeting. And then it is at this point expected again that the grant contracts would begin October 1, 2019. And then sometime soon after that, we would have a grantee orientation where we would discuss a little bit more in detail expectations of the funding. So again, keep in mind that the timeline, other than the May 2nd and June 7th dates, are subject to being moved based off of issues that may occur. As you see, there are a number of board meetings that need to occur. Should there be any changes to them, it would affect the timing of these key dates. So just want to make sure you're aware of that. However, the proposal due date is hard and fast at 5 p.m. June 7th, 2019. So Sean, any last questions, our IT staff? Ashley, do you have anything else to add to the Matters Conference? And I think that concludes it. If you have any questions, again, feel free to email the questions to jjgrants@bscc.ca.gov. And as we receive these questions, we will post question and answers for you. Thank you.